You would never pick up a book and start reading the last few chapters of the book and expect to understand everything that has happened. But millions of us every day start reading the Bible in the middle with the New Testament, leaving out sometimes entirely all the events of the Old Testament. If we do that, we will never understand who the Creator is, and we will never understand who Abraham or Esau or Jacob is. And without understanding these things, we will never understand why the world is the way it is today. Again, when you start to read the Bible, you have to start at the very beginning. For most of us, that's Genesis. But it's not only Genesis, it's also the book of Jasher. King David used to read Jasher, and so did many of the other prophets. Let's read about the two nations that came out of Abraham, because these two nations are the two main nations that are fighting in the world today. And they are fighting for the kingdom. They are fighting to establish the kingdom, because in the end of the day, there can only be one kingdom, and that we know will be the kingdom of our Father. But at the end of what day? The end of the day of the battle of our Father. After that time, there shall only be one kingdom established here on earth. But today, there are two kingdoms, and we need to understand who those two, there are two nations, and we need to understand who those two nations are. The New Testament deals primarily with events that will happen in the latter days, the last part of the world before the kingdom of the Father is established here on earth. If you did not read or don't familiarize yourself with the Old Testament, you would have missed out on most of history. You will not understand who the Creator is, who Abraham, Jacob, or Esau is, nor would you have any understanding of all the nations that came out of Jacob and all the nations that came out of Esau. And these are the two nations that are fighting to establish the kingdom here on earth forever. How will they do that? Well, the nations of Esau, their plan is to establish their kingdom with the building of the Tower of Babel, the New World Order, one government, one military, and one religion for everybody in the world. And what we see today, all the fighting that's happening in the Middle East, all the fighting that's threatening to happen in Korea, in Asia, all over the world, all of these things are simply a smokescreen. Hollywood on a worldwide stage. The real battle, the real fight is between the children of Esau and the children of Jacob, and the fight is to establish the kingdom. While the children of Esau are trying to establish the Tower of Babel and establish their kingdom, our Father is working very hard too to establish his kingdom here on earth through his people, Israel, the children of Jacob, and for the benefit of all the rest of mankind. Now, where do we begin? If we are to begin only at Genesis, we will miss out on a lot of important pieces of information that are found in the book of Jasher. The book of Jasher is not in the Bible because Esau knows that it contains too much information. Esau knows that it will provide too much understanding, so he left the book of Jasher out. But the only way to know what is in the book of Jasher, The only way to properly supplement what we learn in Genesis is to read the book of Joshua. And so today we're going to read a lot of passages from Joshua so that we can gain a better understanding of who the two nations are. Who are the nations of Esau? Who are the nations of his brother Jacob? To get that understanding, we have to start at the very beginning. We have to start with Abraham, and we have to start with Nimrod. Abraham and Nimrod. Let's begin with Genesis 25. Genesis 25 contains the story of Jacob and Esau. We'll read that quickly, and then we'll go ahead and move rapidly forward so that we can get to Jasher and find out what Jasher has to offer us. Genesis 25, verse 19. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him. And Rebekah his wife conceived, and the children struggled within her. And she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And what we just read is that Isaac went to our father. He said, You promised to make a lot of nations come out of me. You promised to establish your kingdom through me. Why is it that my wife cannot get pregnant? And sure enough, Rebekah, his wife, becomes pregnant. And she is pregnant with twins. But she knows that what's inside of her is to be blessed from the Father himself, blessed by our Father himself. So why is it that she is in so much pain? Why is it that she is suffering so much throughout her pregnancy? Verse 23. And the Lord said unto her, Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when the days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over, like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau, because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob sought pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, Sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob said, Swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Here we just read a lot. We read that when Rebekah was pregnant, the twins were fighting in her stomach already, even before they came out. And when she asked our father, he told her that there are two nations in your womb. But what he made clear is that it is two manner of people. That means that these two nations, and each nation would beget other nations, meaning each nation would eventually become many, many nations, the nations that we see in the world today. Each nation of Esau is very different than each of the nations of Jacob. That's why our father said that it is two manner of people. And when they were coming out, the first one, Esau, came out red, and he was named Esau. The second one that came out was Jacob. And notice when he was coming out, he grabbed a hold of Esau's heel. Now, this is very important. Those of us who are familiar with Greek and Roman history, we know that during the Battle of Troy, the Trojan War, that Achilles had only one weak point, and that was his heel. That story of Achilles and his heel is a retelling of the story of Jacob and Esau. And in the Roman story, Achilles would be Esau. He had one weakness, and that was his heel. And eventually, it was that weakness that was exploited to bring about his demise in the Trojan War. Why is that important? Well, that's because the nations of that we see today are reflective of these two nations. And so the children of Jacob, when they tell their stories, they use the Bible because the Bible contains all the information that pertains to Israel. But Esau and his nations, when he is telling his stories, he has had to tell them in a slightly different way. But because a lot of his stories are the same stories that we find in the Bible, the same stories that relate to Esau and Jacob, he tells them in a different way, but in a manner that allows the story to be passed on from generation to generation. Now, as we continue to read, we see that Esau was a cunning hunter. Who else was a cunning hunter? Nimrod. Nimrod was known as a mighty hunter before the Lord. And indeed, the spirit of Nimrod is the same spirit that operates in Esau back then and in Esau today. If we continue with Genesis 25, we see that at some point Esau came in out of the field and he told his brother that he is ready to die. When we read the book of Jasher, we find that Esau at the time was in the field. He was in battle. And so when he came in to his brother Jacob and said that he was faint and he needed nourishment to continue his battles, to continue his conquest that he had already embarked on even as a young man. When Esau told Jacob that he is faint, he was much more than weak. He was being deceitful. Esau was recreant. He was confessing himself to be overcome. He was confessing himself to be vanquished. But the idea is that any pledges that came out of that, he was not going to keep. He was going to take back his pledge. The word recreant means that you are under pretense. You are making believe that you are weak in order to show weakness to your opponent and thereby gain an advantage when he lowers his guard. That's exactly what was happening here. Esau came and he told Jacob that he is faint. But in actuality, Esau is recreant. Esau was pretending to be weak in order to gain favor from his brother, in this case, in order to get what he needed to continue the battle. And so when he sold his birthright to Jacob, he never had any intention of selling it in the first place. He was being deceitful. He was being deceptive. He told Jacob that he would give him his birthright when all along he was planning to come back and take it. He was planning to do what he needed to do to get the birthright for himself. Now, what does the birthright entitle Jacob to? It entitles Jacob to the kingdom. It allows him and his descendants to establish the kingdom of our Father here on earth forever. And so Esau was never willing to really give that up. But he is such a deceiver that he told his brother he would in order to gain what he needed to continue the battle, and then his plans were to come back and take his birthright. Well, it's like they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So today, Esau's children, Esau's nations, behave the same way that Esau did back then. They use deception. They pretend to be weak in order to get closer to you, in order to use that as an advantage. Remember, it's two manners of people. Where the nations of Jacob are peaceful, the nations of Esau are warlike. Where the nations of Jacob take in strangers, the nations of Esau has immigration laws to keep strangers out. It's two completely different manner of people. One close to our Father, one not so close. One believing in one creator, the other one having gods without number. Today, let's learn about these two nations, and let's go back to where it all began, with Abraham and Nimrod. Now, let's look at Nimrod. And so let's go to Genesis 10, verse 1, so we can begin with Nimrod. And then we'll look at Abraham, and we'll see how the two interacted. And we'll see how the stage was set for everything that happened between Esau and Jacob, and everything that is happening in the world today. So let's go to Genesis 10, verse 1, and then we'll jump down to verse 6, followed by verse 8. Verse 1, now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. Verse 6, and the sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Verse 8, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of the land went forth Ashur, and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. The same is a great city. So here we learn that after the flood, Noah had Ham. Ham gave birth to Cush, which is Ethiopia, and Cush, when he was much older, gave birth to Nimrod. Now Nimrod became a mighty hunter. That means he hunted not just animals, but also men. He hunted men, he hunted nations, and he hunted souls. Let's continue with Genesis 11. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So we learn that during the days of Nimrod, that the men of the earth, that is to say, the kings, the princes, the elite of the world, made a pact amongst themselves. They decided to get together and to build a tower that may reach unto heaven. And their purpose is that they wanted to make a name for themselves and that they did not want to be scattered about the face of the earth. Well, the Tower of Babel is being built today. You have the children of these men that were there in the days of Nimrod. Today, their plan is to once again build a tower. And they have the same fear. They see that as the world's population increases, their numbers become less and less significant. And they are afraid that sooner or later there will be so many people in the world, they will no longer be able to control it. They will no longer be able to dominate. And therefore they will be scattered, powerless about the face of the earth. And they said to each other, let us make a pact, let us make a covenant, and let us make sure that we do it. And that covenant is to build one government. That is the Tower of Babel. One government, one military, one religion. When that happens, they will have so much power on the earth that they would seem like, to the rest of us anyway, like gods, because they will have the power of life and death in the palm of their hands. They will decide the fate of nations and the fate of people all over the world. And so when our Father saw that, he came down and he stopped their plans so that they would not be able to execute it. So this was in the days of Nimrod. Let us go now to Jasher chapter 7, and let's see how Jasher expands on the story and how Jasher gives us a lot more information on who Nimrod is and Nimrod's dealings with Abraham. Jasher 7, verse 23. And Cush, the son of Ham, the son of Noah, took a wife in those days, in his old age, and she bare a son, and they called his name Nimrod, saying, at that time the sons of men again began to rebel and transgress against God. And the child grew up, and his father loved him exceedingly, for he was the son of his old age. And the garments of skin which God made for Adam and his wife when they went out of the garden were given to Cush. For after the death of Adam and his wife, the garments were given to Enoch, the son of Jared. And when Enoch was taken up to God, he gave them to Methuselah, his son. And at the death of Methuselah, Noah took them and brought them to the ark. And there they were with him until he went out of the ark. And in their going out, Ham stole those garments from Noah his father, and he took them and hid them from his brothers. And when Ham begat his firstborn Cush, he gave him the garments in secret, and they were with Cush many days. So thus far we learned that Nimrod had some garments that were given to Adam and Eve by the Creator himself. And we found out that those garments eventually ended up in the hands of Cush. Now, Cush is Ethiopia. And when you read Genesis 10, the table of nations, you find that Ham begot Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. And when you revisit history, you find that Cush, Ethiopia, is the oldest of nations, followed by Egypt, and followed by Put and Canaan. So it was out of Cush that all of the other nations of the world eventually came out of. And so uh, it's explained very well in the book of Joshua. We see that Cush had those garments. That's what made Cush the first among the nations and the first among the empires. Verse 29. And Cush also concealed them from his sons and brothers. And when Cush had begotten Nimrod, he gave him those garments through his love for him. And Nimrod grew up, and when he was 20 years old, he put on those garments. And Nimrod became strong when he put on the garments, the same way that Cush had become strong when he put on those garments. 29, 30 again. And Nimrod became strong when he put on the garments. And God gave him might and strength. And he was a mighty hunter in the earth. Yea, he was a mighty hunter in the field. And he hunted animals, and he built altars, and he offered upon them the animals before the Lord. And Nimrod strengthened himself, and he rose up from amongst his brethren, and he fought the battles of his brethren against all their enemies round about. And the Lord delivered the enemies of his brethren into his hands, and God prospered him from time to time in his battles, and he reigned upon the earth. Verse 39. And when Nimrod had joyfully returned from battle, after having conquered his enemies, all his brethren, together with those who knew him before, assembled to make him king over all of them. Verse 39. And when Nimrod had joyfully returned from battle, after having conquered his enemies, all his brethren, together with those who knew him before, assembled to make him king over them. And they placed the regal crown upon his head. And he set over his subjects and people princes, judges, and rulers, as is the custom amongst kings. And he placed Terah, the son of Nahor, the prince of his host, and he dignified him and elevated him above all his princes. So now, after Nimrod put on those garments, he became powerful, and he conquered all the nations that were around him. And so Nimrod built for himself one of the world's first great empires. And he placed Terah, a man named Terah, of the line of Shem, one of the great grandchildren of Shem, Terah, as the prince of his host. In other words, Terah was in charge of the armies of Nimrod. Let's jump to verse 46. And all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. But Nimrod did not go in the ways of the Lord, and he was more wicked than all the men that were before him, from the days of the flood until those days. And he made gods of wood and stone, and he bestowed, and he bowed down to them, and he rebelled against the Lord, and taught all his subjects and the people of the earth his wicked ways. And Mardon, his son, was more wicked than his father. And every one that heard the acts of Mardon, the son of Nimrod, would say concerning him, From the wicked goeth forth wickedness. Therefore it became a proverb in the whole earth, saying, From the wicked goeth forth wickedness. And it was current in the words of men from that time to this. Indeed, it is current in this day and age. We say the apple does not fall far from the tree. That's the same thing. Nimrod was evil, and his son Mardon was even more evil than him. And likewise, Esau was evil, and the children of Esau are even more evil than their father Esau. Verse 49. And Terah, the son of Nahor, prince of Nimrod's host, was in those days very great in the sight of the king and his subjects, and the king and princes loved him, and they elevated him very high. And Terah took a wife, and her name was Amthelo, the daughter of Carnebo. And the wife of Terah conceived, and bare him a son in those days. Terah was 70 years old when he begat him, and Terah called the name of his son that was born to him Abram, because the king had raised him high in those days, and dignified him above all his princes that were with him. Just like today's Native Americans, where we find names that has meaning, for example, crazy horse, or flower of gold. Anacaona, for example, means flower of gold in the Taino language. Ancient Israel also used names that had meaning, and this practice went back even before Israel, when men was walking here on earth in days of old, in the days of Nimrod. They were using names that mean something. And usually that name was reflective of the life that you lead. Even though you got the name at birth, it meant and continues to mean to this day the life that you are going to lead. That life is reflected in your name. And so when Terah had Abraham, he named him Abram. And what that meant is that he, Terah that is greatly exalted because he was the prince of Nimrod's host, because he was exalted in the land. He named his son, Father is exalted, Abram. Jasher 8, verse 1. And it was in the night that Abram was born that all the servants of Terah and all the wise men of Nimrod and his conjurers came and ate and drank in the house of Terah, and they rejoiced with him on that night. And when all the wise men and conjurers went out from the house of Terah, they lifted up their eyes toward heaven that night to look at the stars. And they saw, and behold, one very large star came from the east and ran in the heavens, and he swallowed up the 4 stars from the 4 sides of the heavens. And all the wise men of the king and his conjurers were astonished at the sight. And the sages understood this matter, and they knew its import. And so, when Abram was being born, the wise men that attended his party went outside. And when they went outside, they saw a star from one side of heaven race across the other side, swallowing up the other 4 stars. Verse 3. And all the wise men of the king and his conjurers were astonished at the sight. And the sages understood this matter, and they knew its import. And they said to each other, this only betokens the child that has been born to Terah this night, who will grow up and be fruitful and multiply and possess all the earth, he and his children forever. And he and his seed will slay great kings and inherit their lands. And the wise men and conjurers went home that night. And in the morning all these wise men and conjurers rose up early and assembled in an appointed house. And they spoke and said to each other, behold, the sight that we saw last night is hidden from the king. It has not been made known to him. And should this thing get known to the king in the latter days, he will say to us, why have you concealed this matter from me? And then we shall all suffer death. Therefore now let us go and tell the king the sight which we saw, and the interpretation thereof, and we shall then remain clear. And so the wise men, that is to say, all the astrologers, the magicians, all the people that used to foretell the future, that were employed by Nimrod and in the employment of kings, they went up to Nimrod and they said, "Look, we saw a vision. And according to the vision, Abraham and his seed will slay you and all the other kings of the earth, and thereby establish their kingdom here on earth forever." Now notice the wise men said among themselves that we cannot keep this thing from Nimrod because of the latter days, because of the days that me and you are living in right now. The wise men said, if this comes out in today's day and age, then we will be in trouble with Nimrod. He will kill us. Now, why do you suppose they were worried about the latter days? That's because these spirits that are in the wise men and that are in Nimrod, they are still alive today. They are still accountable to Nimrod today. And so they told themselves that we had better tell Nimrod now, because in the latter days Nimrod will kill us. Let us continue. Verse 8. And they did so, and they all went to the king and bowed down to him to the ground. And they said, "May the king live! May the king live! We heard that a son was born to Terah, the son of Nahor, the prince of thy host. And we yesternight came to his house, and we ate and drank, and rejoiced with him that night. And when thy servants went out from the house of Terah to go to our respective homes, to abide there for the night, we lifted up our eyes to heaven, and we saw a great star coming from the east, and the same star ran with great speed, and swallowed up the four great stars from the four sides of the heavens. And thy servants were astonished at the sight which we saw, and we were greatly terrified, and we made our judgment upon the sight, and we knew by our wisdom the proper interpretation thereof, that this thing applies to the child that is born to Terah, who will grow up and multiply greatly, and become powerful, and kill all the kings of the earth, and inherit all their lands, he and his seed forever. And now, our Lord and King, behold, we have truly acquainted thee with what we have seen concerning this child. If it seemeth good to the king to give his father value for this child, we will slay him before he shall grow up and increase in the land, and his evil increase against us, that we and our children perish through his evil. And the king heard their words, and they seemed good in his sight. And he sent and called for Terah, and Terah came before the king. And so they did just that. They went to Nimrod and they told Nimrod, "Hey, you have got to kill Abraham. If you don't, one of his children eventually will rule the entire world." We know from other prophecies that the child that shall eventually come out of Abraham is Israel. That child is the Messiah. And it's the Messiah and his nation of Israel. And so Abraham was targeted for death even at his birth by Nimrod and by his wise men, by the people that were around him. Let's go to verse 32. And before we do, in verse 14, Nimrod sent for Terah. And Terah came to Nimrod, and Nimrod told Terah to give him Abraham, and that he will give Terah a house full of gold and diamonds and other precious metals for Abraham, so that he may kill Abraham. But Terah bought some time. Terah said that it is a hard thing for him to give up his son so quickly. And so he asked Nimrod for some time. Um, but eventually his time would run out. Let's go to verse 32. Verse 32. And it was in the third day that the king sent to Terah, saying, Send me thy son for a price, as I spoke to thee. And shouldest thou not do this, I will send and slay all thou hast in thy house, so that thou shalt not even have a dog remaining. And Terah hastened, as this thing was urged from the king. And he took a child from one of his servants, which his handmaid had borne to him that day. And Terah brought the child to the king, and received value for him. And the Lord was with Terah in this matter, that Nimrod might not cause Abram's death. And the king took the child from Terah, and with all his might dashed his head to the ground, for he thought it had been Abram. And this was concealed from him from that day, and it was forgotten by the king, as it was the will of providence not to suffer Abram's death. And Terah took Abram, his son, secretly, together with his mother and nurse, and he concealed them in a cave, and he brought them their provisions monthly. And the Lord was with Abram in the cave, and he grew up. And Abram was in the cave 10 years, and the king and his princes, soothsayers, and sages thought that the king had killed Abram. Now we learn from the book of Jasher how Abraham was born. We learn in much the same way that the Messiah was born with wise men coming to celebrate his birth. So too that happened at the time of Abraham. So too did that happen with Abraham, particularly because his father was such a great man already in the land. And what did we learn? We learned that Nimrod killed somebody else, and that in this particular instance, Abram was able to escape death, and his father hid him in a cage. Now let's go to Joshua 9. And when Abram came out from the cave, he went to Noah and his son Shem, and he remained with them to learn the instruction of the Lord and his ways. And no man knew where Abram was, and Abram served Noah and his son for a long time. And so we learn that Abram went to Shem, and he went to Noah. And Shem and Noah began or took his education to new heights. Whatever his mom had taught him before, Noah and Shem was able to steer him in the direction that he needed to be steered in. Noah and Shem taught him the ways of our Father, the laws and the commandments of our Father, because the laws and the commandments did not begin with Moses. Moses set them to paper. He wrote them down for the nation of Israel so that everybody can have something to review. But our Father has said that he declares the ending at the beginning. So our Father hides nothing from us. He tells us everything. So even though in the days of Nimrod, men were behaving wickedly and did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, they all knew what the laws and the commandments of our Father was, even in those days, because our Father does not rule in secret. He does not rule in the dark. Everybody knew. Noah and Shem knew, and they taught Abraham so that he may know and so that he may teach his children. Verse 6. And Abram was in Noah's house 39 years, and Abram knew the Lord from 3 years old, and he went in the ways of the Lord until the day of his death, as Noah and his son Shem had taught him. And all the sons of the earth in those days greatly transgressed against the Lord, and they rebelled against him, and they served other gods, and they forgot the Lord who had created them in the earth. And the inhabitants of the earth made unto themselves at that time every man his god, gods of wood and stone, which could neither speak, hear, nor deliver. And the sons of men served them, and they became their gods. So while this was going on, while Noah and Shem and Abraham was serving the Creator and was learning and following the ways of our Creator, most of the rest of the men in the earth did that which they pleased in their own eyes, that which they thought was right in their own eyes, and they made gods, fake gods that could not heal, nor deliver, nor speak. And they prayed to those gods that could not hear or speak or deliver. And those false gods became their gods. And they did this in order to deceive the rest of the men who were on the earth. Verse 7. And the king and all his servants and Terah with all his household were then the first of those that served gods of wood and stone, the same gods of wood and stone that men today continue to worship. For example, the image of Christ. That's idolatry. That's a god of wood and stone. When you kiss the cross, that's idolatry. That's a god of wood and stone. The so-called saints, the so-called mother of heaven, Zeus, Apollo, all of these are gods that profit nothing, gods that do not hear your prayer, nor could they do anything for you. Verse 8. And Terah had 12 gods of large size, made of wood and stone, after the 12 months of the year, and he served each one monthly. And every month Terah would bring his meat offering and drink offering to his gods. Thus did Terah all the days. And all that generation were wicked in the sight of the Lord, and they thus made every man his god. But they forsook the Lord who had created them. And King Nimrod reigned securely. Verse 20. And King Nimrod reigned securely, and all the earth was under his control, and all the earth was of one tongue, and words of union. And all the princes of Nimrod and his great men took counsel together, Put, Mitzrayim, Cush, and Canaan, with their families, and they said to one another, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and in it a strong tower, and its top reach in heaven, and we will make ourselves famed, so that we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, that we may reign mightily over them, and that we may not become scattered over the earth on account of their wars. So here again we see a repeat of what we read in Genesis of the building of the Tower of Babel. But notice that we have additional words, so that we may reign upon the whole world. That is the purpose of the Tower of Babel, is so that Nimrod can establish his kingdom firmly here on earth, a kingdom in which he will reign over the entire world, not just a few nations, not just the Middle East, not just Europe, but the entire world. This Tower of Babel is the new world order, and it is being constructed even as we speak. Verse 22. And they all went before the king, and they told the king these words, and the king agreed with them in this affair, and he did so. And all the families assembled, consisted of about 600,000 men, and they went to seek an extensive piece of ground to build the city and the tower. And they sought in the whole earth, and they found none like one valley at the east of the land of Shinar, about 2 days' walk. And they journeyed there, and they dwelt there. And they began to make bricks and burn fires to build the city and the tower that they had imagined to complete. And the building of the tower was unto them a transgression and a sin, and they began to build it. And whilst they were building against the Lord God of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend into heaven. So you see, they want to war in the building of the Tower of Babel, and in the construction of the New World Tower. They want to war with the Creator himself. They want to war with our Father, the King of Israel, and they want to ascend to heaven. They want to be seen as gods. They want to be seen by the rest of the world, that is to say, me and you. They want us to look at them as gods, to feel that they are gods, and to worship them as gods. Verse 26. And all these people and all the families divided themselves in three parts. The first said, we will ascend into heaven and fight against him. The second said, we will ascend to heaven and place our own gods there and serve them. And the third part said, we will ascend to heaven and smite him with bows and spears. And God knew all their works and all their evil thoughts, and he saw the city and the tower which they were building. Verse 27. And when they were building, they built themselves a great city and a very high and strong tower. And on account of its height, the mortar and the bricks did not reach the builders in their ascent to it, until those who went up had completed a full year. And after that, they reached to the builders and gave them the mortar and the bricks. Thus it was done daily. And well, verse 27 lets us know that the building of the tower did not happen instantly. It took them a long time. That's the same way that is happening with the New World Order. It is not something that you can gather all your bricks and build in one day. You have to lay it brick by brick by brick, and it's going to take a long time. We find that this idea of the New World Order is in many ways centuries in the making. Napoleon had tried it himself. And just in the last 100 years alone, we see that World War One, World War Two, and the coming World War Three is all a part of laying those bricks in place, brick by brick by brick, until with the culmination of World War Three, they will end it with a new world order, with one government, one military, and one religion for the entire world, where they will give us a fake Messiah to worship here on earth. Let's continue. Verse 28. And behold, these ascended. 28 again. And behold, these ascended, and others descended the whole day. And if a brick should fall from their hands and get broken, they would all weep over it. And if a man fell and died, none of them would look at him. And so what they're saying here is that though people were dying, it did not matter to the people that were building the tower. In the wars that it is taken to create a new world order, the builders of the modern Tower of Babel do not care. But if their plan is stalled, then they weep, then they cry. They don't care about human lives. They care only that the tower is built, only that the new world order is achieved. Verse 29. And the Lord knew their thoughts, and it came to pass when they were building, they cast the arrows towards the heavens, and all the arrows fell upon them filled with blood. And when they saw them, they said to each other, surely we have slain all those that are in heaven. Well, who are they that are in heaven? The saints. Not the saints of the Catholic Church, but those who are on earth who the Father shall place his seal upon in the latter days. These are the people that will come out of the great tribulation unharmed. And these saints are also the children of Israel and all the children of God who fear God and who wish to remain in his tabernacle. And so, in the construction of the Tower of Babel, in the building of the New World Order, many people are being killed. And while these people are dying, the builders of the New World Order, they don't care. They see that it is a good thing. And they see that since they are able to kill these innocent people, surely providence is with them. Surely they will succeed. But as we know, that was not the case, neither shall it be the case in the building of the New World Order today. Verse 30. For this was from the Lord, in order to cause them to err, and in order to destroy them from off the face of the ground. And they built the tower and the city, and they did this thing daily until many days and years were elapsed, just like the New World Order. It's taken them years, centuries, many generations to carry this plan across. And we are right now at the point where they are about to put the final breaks in. We are in the latter days. Verse 31. And they built the tower and the city, and they did this thing daily until many days and years were elapsed. And God said to the 70 angels who stood foremost before him, to those who were near to him, saying, Come, let us descend and confuse their tongues, that one man shall not understand the language of his neighbor. And they did so unto them. And from that day following, they forgot each man his neighbor's tongue, and they could not understand to speak in one tongue. And when the builder took from the hands of his neighbor lime or stone, which he did not order, the builder would cast it away and throw it upon his neighbor, that he would die. And they did so many days, and they killed many of them in this manner. And the Lord smote the three divisions that were there, and he punished them according to their works and designs. Those who said, We will ascend to heaven and serve our gods, became like apes and elephants. And those who said, We will smite heaven with arrows, the Lord killed them, one man through the hand of his neighbor. And the third division of those who said, We will ascend to heaven and fight against him, the Lord scattered them throughout the earth. And so we learn here that our Father came down and he destroyed the tower that they were building. And he destroyed many of the men who were building the tower. And he did this through their confusion. Verse 36. And those who were left amongst them, when they knew and understood the evil which was coming upon them, they forsook the building, and they also became scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And they ceased building the city and the tower. Therefore he called that place Babel, for there the Lord confounded the language of the whole earth. Behold, it was at the east of the land of Shinar. And as to the tower which the sons of men built, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up 1/3 part thereof, and a fire also descended from heaven and burned another third. And the other third is left to this day, and it is of that part which was aloft, and its circumference is 3 days' walk. And many of the sons of men died in that tower, a people without number. And so Jasher gives us another perspective. He gives us a lot more information on the Tower of Babel, information that we did not learn about in Genesis. And we learn that Abraham was of those same days. Now let's go to to Jasher chapter 10. Verse 1. And Peleg, the son of Eber, died in those days, in the 48th year of the life of Abram, the son of Terah. And all the days of Peleg were 239 years. And when the Lord had scattered the sons of men on account of their sin at the tower, behold, they spread forth into many divisions, and all the sons of men were dispersed into the four corners of the earth. And all the families became each according to its language, its land, or its city. And the sons of men built many cities according to their families, in all the places where they went, and throughout the earth where the Lord had scattered them. And some of them built cities in places from which they were afterward extirpated. That means that they were removed forcefully. These are the Canaanites, because in Genesis 10 we learn that the children of Canaan, the children of Canaan, had many children of their own, and that these children were scattered about the face of the earth. In Genesis, it was said that they were scattered abroad. Well, these children of Canaan, the Hivites, the Amorites, and all of these nations, they were in a land that did not belong to them. And so they were removed from that land, and they went and they basically they colonized all of the continents throughout the rest of the world when they left the land of Canaan. Well, in the lands that they went to, they multiplied into nations. But eventually, when the children of Israel went to those same lands, they were extirpated from those lands as well. They were destroyed and uprooted from those lands and removed from those lands as well, because those are not lands that our Father had given to them. Verse 5 again. And some of them built cities in places such as Canaan, and also places such as the Americas and other parts of the world. Verse 5. And some of them built cities in places from which they were afterward extirpated, and they called these cities after their own names, or the names of their children, or after their particular occurrences.